every week, oh good. Every week during the pandemic, we got to offer half-hour Wednesday night concerts, and I know that some of you have been reaching out and missing those, and I certainly have too. So you'll be happy to know that a portion of the program tonight will be a conversation with Kendra Dreskin about the role of Jewish women in Jewish music and her particular experiences. And we will do a retrospective of 50 years of Jewish women's contributions as composers and performers in American Jewish music mostly, but a tiny bit Israeli Jewish women's contributions as well. I'm going to start with a story that most of you have heard from me from other talks about Jewish music. The song that probably is the most well recognized, not just at TBO, but across the board. And we've played this game before about, think of the first time that you recall hearing this song. Oh, say shalom b'mroma. Oh, yeah, say shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'achol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'achol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'achol Yisrael. Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'achol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'achol Yisrael. Just a reminder, if you're not on mute right now, if you would put yourself on mute, then we can all sing together. I wish I could hear all of your voices singing too. It's the thing I miss the most about pandemic singing. But if you have not learned this little tidbit with me before, put in the chat where you think the first time you recall hearing that song, and maybe what year approximately you recall hearing that song. Barbara has her hand up, but if you put it in the chat, then we can all see.
I'm sorry, that was a mistake.
Not a problem. Any guesses about, or just thoughts about when you recall hearing that for the first time? Or you're all experts because you've been to a music session with me before. Mike?
I think that was written after this, the 1973 war.
Close. Usually, and I'm glad.
Either that or was after the 6-Day War.
So you are exactly right. It was written by a woman named Nurit Hirsch. Judy's having freezing issues, coming and going. Well, I hope you're coming and less going, more coming, less going. Nurit Hirsch is an Israeli, obviously female songwriter. Many, many times when I offer that song as an opening or a closing song, I'll have people approach me and say, I definitely heard that song in my show when I was a kid, and I remember it as early as right after the war. I remember it in 1945. I remember it in 1957. I remember it in 1961. And the funniest thing about it is it has become from Sinai, and many people don't know that it is not traditional. It's written by a woman named Nurit Hirsch, and you're right, Mike, it was written for a songwriting contest in 1967, and it didn't win. It got 3rd place, and now it is probably the most recognized piece, certainly that we use at Bethor, but that's true across the United States. Mike, did you want to add one other thing?
Well, it probably was the annual song competition in Israel, and the winner of the year of the 6-Day War was Yerushalayim Shel Zahav.
That's exactly right, and we're going to talk about that in just a little while.
I remember.
But nonetheless, it was funny to me that this major contribution by one of the earlier folk style female Jewish composers is now treated as from Sinai, essentially, that music has a funny way of getting into our brains and invading memories that perhaps it was not there for. But I'd like to transition and welcome my friend Ellen Dreskin to our conversation tonight about the contributions of Jewish women in Jewish music. For me personally, Ellen's contributions are huge. Ellen is one of my favorite mentors and teachers in American Jewish music, and I'm so grateful that you are here with us tonight. So welcome.
Hello. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you again, some of you again, and always good to see Lexie.
I'm going to put you side by side with me if I can, Ellen. Is this, let's see.
Okay, let's see if, and then
There's Ellen.
Excellent. Yes.
Okay, now can you see a thumbs up if you're seeing us side by side? Are you seeing us side by side? Who do you see, me or Ellen? Don't say no one.
Oh, now I see me. Now I got pinned. So we can pin you too. Whoever just pinned me can pin you as well, and then you'll be next.
We'll
both.
We're only getting one at a time. We're not getting both. Oh, now
we
now side by side.
Okay, we won't touch anything. So Ellen, if you would tell us about your entrance into Jewish music and how you were introduced, or your earliest memories of Jewish music.
Well, for me, it's funny because I may have told you this story before. I, some kids are just like music and like singing. I would imagine that you were one of those kids as well. But I actually have my kindergarten Sunday school report card. And my teacher's name was Mrs. Jake Blend. I don't know her first name because she was Mrs. Jake Blend. And my Sunday school report card when I was 5 years old says, Ellen's singing of the hymns is most inspiring. And for me, and I remember the songs that I knew. I remember those songs, but her version of him was, oh, once there was a wicked, wicked man, and Haman was his name. But so I was into evidently the Jewish music. I enjoyed the songs from the very beginning. But it's funny because in an email to me about talking about tonight, you said, something, a little, not so historical, but going back to like 1970. And I thought, okay, well, I turned 13 in 1970. So what we're talking about, the last 50 years of history is kind of like, oh yeah, I lived through that. And what I was thinking about, particularly with women's voices, and when did I first start to hear them and notice them, I grew up in a classical reform synagogue in Texas. And there were choir members, there was a non-Jewish choir in the choir loft. I have no idea who they were. But from the get-go, in any reform congregation that had a choir, it was really not a big deal to be hearing women's voices, even if you couldn't see them, to be hearing those voices leading the hymns and the prayers, etc. Because I didn't grow up with a cantor in my synagogue at all. So, and the same, it just never came as a surprise to anybody. Now, of course, there's a whole spectrum of Jewish observance, and for many, even today, you don't hear women's voices. It's considered, disrespectful to be hearing women's voices in such way. But I think the singing in the choir these were probably my earliest role models, and I don't even know who they were.
Do you remember your first opportunities for participating in Jewish music?
My first, I guess, when I got into youth group, I was already playing guitar. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be Carly Simon when I grew up. And then I went to Jewish summer camp when I was 16. And that was totally the end of the beginning and the end of the story right there. I saw song leaders for the first time and heard camp music for the first time and thought, okay, this is it. And I think that by the following year I was leading. I was, already playing guitar and learning the Jewish songs and trying to be like Debbie Friedman, really, or some sort of Jewish Carly Simon, one or the other.
Right. Would you say that starting to get to lead, was that in your synagogue or in a summer camp setting or youth group? Or?
Certainly first and foremost in the summer camp setting.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was a guitarist, and guitars, much more so than women's voices, guitar voices were not very welcome. It wasn't. It didn't have anything to do with women playing the instruments. But this was a whole generational shift, and I think that it's in partnership, the women's voices coming forward, as well as the contemporary American Jewish music scene. American Nusach. Just like there's Sephardic Nusach, Eastern European, or African Jewish music, American Jewish music just busted into the scene in the 70s in a big way.
Is that what put you on the path to the cantors, or did that come about in a different way?
Well, sir, I kept doing the song leading thing all the way through college, and I met Debbie Friedman my freshman year of college.
Wow.
And we became friends, and I met her by being asked to play with her at my synagogue in Houston. The new rabbi had brought her in to do a Friday night service, and I was in college a few hours away, and he said, will you come in and do this with Debbie? She wants company, which she always did, which was so lovely of her. And then the music was really Debbie's first music. Not only was it guitar, but if you listen to her first album, Sing Unto God, was really rock and roll liturgy. And one of the things that you mentioned to me was did this come first and foremost through the youth movement? Was this the young folks and people who went to camp in the summer like me, bringing this back to our home synagogues? But this music, all of Debbie's music, was being written for teenagers, so it was very natural. And then the teenagers started to grow up, and we still wanted to be singing our Jewish music in shul. So it was the beginning of the evolutions or revolution, depending upon how you look at it.
Sure. So I know that you are not among the very first generation of female cantors, but I know you are friends and colleagues with Barbara Oswald, who was the first ever ordained female cantor. And that was just in 1975 that she became invested, or now ordained, as a cantor. And would you talk to us about what that experience was for the women who were that first generation, or specifically Barbara? It's really well documented in her interviews and her memoir that there were big challenges that women faced in that space. And while there was the Debbie Friedman and young song leaders coming up with their guitars, that was not so much in the synagogues yet, like the cantors were.
Right. Because it's funny because I mentioned to you beforehand, I know Barbara. I've known Barbara since, I guess, about 5 years she was out of school, because I met her maybe in 81 or something, 81 was when we met. And just some evidence that in synagogues, hearing a woman's voice was not such a huge change for people is from the minute that Barbara got out of school, she was at a very large congregation on Long Island, Temple Beth El in Great Neck, New York. And straight out of school, she was the cantor of this synagogue. She ran into a lot of challenges at HUC in school, at Hebrew Union College, the seminary that she went to and that we both went to. But she tells a story that when she decided to become a cantor, she didn't know that women weren't cantors. She had absolutely no idea. She was in New York. I don't remember all the details, but it is in her memoir, that she went to HUC and walked in and said, I want to apply to cantorial school. And the administrator behind the desk said, what do you mean? But no one had ever questioned it before. There was no rule that said you couldn't.
Right.
It's just no one ever had. And
Huh.
so she applied to cantorial school, and they said, well, okay. It wasn't like this big reform movement had to decide to invest cantors. And in school, what she discovered was all of the traditional Jewish music that we were studying in cantorial school was written from men's voices.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
that was a challenge right off the bat. But the nusach that was all written for men's voices was not what was being used in Reform congregations. So, and to have Reform Jewish choral pieces with soprano solos, a female cantor could step right into that role.
Mhm.
And then women started composing for women, and and the field was wide open. The field was wide open.
Would you say more about that, about how Reform synagogues were very used to the idea of hearing a woman's voice, but what they were learning in the Reform seminary didn't match with that? How does that happen, that what they're learning in the synagogue is not necessarily, in the seminary is not necessarily what's being reflected in the shuls?
Mm-hmm. Now, if my classical Reform upbringing is any indication, and this is not my field of expertise, but I can talk from my own experience. In the birth of Reform Judaism, in an effort to westernize it and in America make it look like, see, fellow Christian neighbors, we're just like y'all. We have pews and we have the altar at the front of the room and the stained glass windows and all of that. Reform synagogues did not have cantors.
Right.
At all.
Huh.
So it's not like they started with more traditional nusach, ritually observant or singing Eastern European cantorial pieces and then had to make a transition. The transition in the Reform movement was from no cantors. It was from choir members with robes in the choir loft to back to any sort of cantors. And then the contemporary Jewish music was needed because even if male or female, the Reform movement was not going to respond at that time to nusach and to Eastern European big cantorial stuff. My growing up, I mentioned there was no cantor. I don't think I knew what a cantor was until I went to summer camp. But every High Holy Days, a tenor from the Metropolitan Opera in New York City would come down to our congregation in Houston and sing High Holy Days. His name was Arturo Sergi. I remember him fondly. But what did we know from cantors? So, so Barbara's arrival in a classical Reform congregation on Long Island would be in sync with, hello, we need some contemporary music to go with this new thing we're doing.
Right. Was that something that in Barbara's training, which was prior to yours, were you learning contemporary Jewish music in the seminary?
There wasn't a lot to be learned, but it was happening fast and furious. Mm-hmm. And I think that same thing is going on now. I think there's an enormous crop of young composers who there's just so much good music coming out, you don't even know what to look at first sometimes. Absolutely. And that's what it was like then. It was a real explosion. From the minute that Debbie wrote her first liturgical pieces about the same time that Jeff Klepper and Danny Freelander were composing. Debbie's music being different, it had and please forgive me for saying something perhaps incorrect, but a feminine quality, mm-hmm. a heart-opening quality to some of the music and to interpretations of the liturgy. There was just a difference in the way Debbie looked at it. But her earliest stuff and Shalom Rav, Jeff and Danny's Shalom Rav, that was all about the same time. And then other people started composing as well. But really, I think Kol Beseder, Jeff and Danny, and Debbie were, certainly contemporaries and producing wonderful stuff. Debbie's was in English, a lot of it.
Mhm.
And that made a difference in the Reform movement too. I didn't grow up knowing a whole lot of prayers in Hebrew. I knew the prayers in English.
Right.
So when Debbie started writing in English, that also made her music much more accessible to classical reform. Her first piece, "And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul." I mean, this is, I know since kindergarten. And
Sure.
she put a lovely melody to it. Who wouldn't want to sing that, you know?
Yeah. So we're talking about her by first name, but if there are any people here who have not heard her name before, Debbie Friedman was an American composer who passed away about 11 years ago and is still widely regarded as the pioneer of this new kind of Jewish music. And her influence on Jewish music and her style and repertoire is still thriving in the Reform space. And especially at Beth Or, we do use a ton of Debbie Friedman's music. And you've talked about how that resonated with your age group of people. Do you remember the general impressions of what Debbie was doing in generations who are older than you, or how that would have resonated within the synagogue when it wasn't teenagers who were leading or teenagers who were hearing it?
Mm-hmm.
Was it a welcome change?
Well, what I've learned in my life is that nobody likes change. And I'm not the only one, you know. And the issue is, I think, or the reason people say people don't like change is because all change involves loss.
Mm-hmm.
In order for something new to come in, you usually have to let go of something. And particularly when it has to do with your faith and the music you grew up with, you know, then it's hard to let go. So like I say, I think that Debbie's music fulfilled a need. Like I say, I think that the fact that she was writing English songs to some of the prayers was important.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it depends on where you are, and it depends on the music. There, some songs are transitional songs, like Shalom Rav was a hit right away and still is to this day. You know, also came from Sinai, almost like Oseh Shalom at this point. So I didn't notice that much resistance. And I think that in my age group and older, so I'm thinking about my older siblings, I'm thinking about even my parents, thought that this was all lovely and wonderful. And really were at a point, you know, it's funny because we think of this as relatively new, and I guess in the life of Judaism, you know, it's just the last little piece. That in every single generation, if we didn't have the older generation getting upset at the younger generations for renovating, innovating, revolutionizing, none of us be here talking about this evening. Even like you say, even the things that we think go back from Sinai, you know, the ones we're talking about now were in my lifetime.
Right.
Which, first of all, makes me feel really old, but but in every generation, people have had to take these liturgical words and Jewish messages and put them, if they're not put to melodies that you still want to sing, then it's all just gonna go by the wayside. So,
what was the, before we get into a little bit more about Debbie, and I know our time with you is running out, so I want to make sure to talk about the initial response from the seminary about this new style of Jewish music that was not traditional, whatever that means, to now. So that response in the 70s to now, the School of Sacred Music is called the Debbie Friedman School, even though she was not herself seminary trained. Is that right?
Correct. She was not seminary trained. She is and was, however, made a lifetime member of the American Conference of Cantors. And in the later years of her life, was a faculty member at HUC at the seminary, both in the New York school and in the Los Angeles school. And she not only taught composition, but she co-taught courses about prayer and the liturgy itself. One thing that could not be denied about Debbie was fluent in Hebrew.
Wow.
And Debbie studied Jewish text and Talmud and Torah and prayer all her life. People thought, she's just some kid with a guitar.
Right.
And how could she possibly really know anything? But she was an enormous role model for taking her Judaism to heart and saying, if we don't know what we're talking about here and what we mean, then what are we doing? So over the years, people really needed to respect Debbie because it was just so obvious that she merited that. And that she was speaking to people's hearts, etc. And then she passed away suddenly from an illness, a sudden illness, like you say, about 11 or 12 years ago, and the shockwaves were so great that the decision was made, and there was a group of donors to the school who said, we want to do this in Debbie's name. And HUC said, okay. And because she had been on the faculty there for 7 or 8 years already. And so really no one can deny the contribution that she made to Jewish music. And it's not to indicate, and Debbie would say this too, I can hear her screaming at me in my head, she was not just about her style of music. When I say she kept studying, she knew Nusach, and she could daven with the best of them. But it wasn't her style in terms of composition. She had a huge amount of respect for the entire spectrum of Jewish observance. And by the end of her life, I'm happy to say, I think she had everybody else's respect. And I'm glad, and I think she knew that before she passed away. And she changed the whole game. Yeah,
that's a great segue, and I'll leave it with you talk about Debbie really changing the game, not just for women, but for Jewish music in general, for women and men. And would you talk about how you see the landscape having changed just a little bit, and maybe where we're going next, either as women who are in music or just as Jewish music in general?
I think that now there are, pendulums swing sometimes. And so, for example, now there are, the majority of the HUC cantorial school are women.
Yeah.
It used to be a boys' club, and Barbara Ostfeld, so 50 years ago, was the first female cantor. Now the field is mostly women, and I think that it's coming back to a balance. The class that I graduated from HUC, I was ordained in 1986, and my class was 8 women. It was the first all-female class.
Wow.
So and there had been other women before that, but this class was all women. And then the conservative movement followed as well, to have female cantors. So I've been really lucky enough to ride the crest of that wave. But when you think about people now, like our contemporaries, Julie Silver and Debbie, and the next generation, one of my song leading teachers was Mary Arian. Now that's Ilana Arian's mom, and now Ilana Arian is really
everywhere.
Up and coming Jewish, the next generation Jewish composer. Chava Morel, Stacy Beyer. It's just so many women, and younger than that, and even a new generation. And people are also realizing, for better or worse, that the cantorial door is not the only door in, and that one can, be amazing worship leader. And I mentioned this to you before and earlier in our conversation. The face of Judaism in terms of Reform Judaism, certainly. And, maybe it's a pendulum swinging back. Reform Judaism was rational and with the form, and we did sing hymns, and we sang them in the vernacular, and and this is a whole new opening of spirit, and not and operating out of love of tradition as opposed to fear of change, and as long as we see that there's nothing to be afraid of here, it's really all about keeping it all alive and fresh. So I really hope that continues. I hear stuff now and I think, not my style.
Right.
And then I think, not meant to be my style. And what Debbie was writing when I was a teenager, it also not meant to be my parents' style. And at a certain point, it's always hard to make those transitions. And without those transitions, we wouldn't survive. So that's really my take on it. I don't know where it's going, but I know it's going. I know it's going to continue to change.
I can't wait to see.
Well, hey, this is your job now. I'm passing it on to you a long time ago.
Happy to do it. Ellen, thank you so much for all of this and more. And your friends at TBO are always happy to spend time with you.
Well, ditto. So please give my love to everybody else there. And thanks for chatting with me.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank
Have
you so
fun.
much.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye. So friends, we are going to transition into, many of you used to join me for Jukebox. For if you joined late, I said it early, that we got to spend about 50 weeks in a row singing together on Wednesday evenings. And I thought I would take this opportunity on the heels of Kendra Dreskin and her. I always adore learning with her. And every time I think that we've prepped and I've already heard everything she's going to say, I always walk away having learned something that I really didn't know. So the first thing that I want to do is acknowledge that so much of what we still do as women who are in the field of Jewish music, whether we're cantors or music directors like I am, it is built on the shoulders of Debbie Friedman. So I want to share with you, it's a short clip, and this is Debbie Friedman in her own words. Let's see if I can figure it out. Can you hear it?
One day, a melody came to me on a bus ride.
Thumbs up if you're hearing
I did
this.
not know at that time that I would be able to write lyrics. So I set the music to the Vahaftha, Thou Shalt Love. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God. And 2 weeks later, I taught it to a group of teenagers who helped me to realize that singing contemporary melodies was one way in which people would be able to connect to a tradition from which many had been alienated. When I saw the effects of this music upon liturgy and then upon those who sang it, I realized that writing liturgical music was to be my passion. I feel that I have been blessed with the gift to create this music. I do not take ownership because I do not feel that it is mine. I am totally committed to working to reach as many people as I can through this music and through the liturgy, that we might perpetuate our Jewish values and our Jewish heritage. People are an inspiration to me and for me. It is because of people that I write. I am often moved by them and what they choose to do in their lives. I am moved by losses and by newfound hopes and ideals. No matter what it is that moves me, there is a connection between being touched and the awareness that there is a presence, a power greater than ourselves, with whom I am able to connect more deeply, through music and through liturgy. And this is something I wish to share with any and all who choose to share it with me. May remember and do all of my commandments.
I'm sure almost all of you have heard that before. And as we heard from Cantor Dreskin, and just a little snippet of it right now, but we are going to sing it together. That was Debbie Friedman's first composition, and it's from her first album, and certainly one of the most recognized of all of her work. So I hope that you will sing it with me now. Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And all these words which I command you on this day shall be in thy heart, shall be in thy heart. And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt speak of them when thou sittest in thy house, when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and they shall be for frontlets between thine eyes. And thou shalt write them on the doorposts of thy house, and upon thy gates, upon thy gates, that ye may remember and do all of my commandments, and be holy unto your God, unto your God, unto your God. How many of you had never heard it before? Yeah, we've all heard that one before. So one of the things that Cantor Dreskin mentioned to us was that while that was a little more subdued and an entrance point for bringing folk melody together with those words that came straight from the classical Reformed temple that was not using Hebrew at the time, she stayed with that, of the English as the focal point of her compositions, but moved into more, sounds like running water in the
Yeah,
background.
Lexie, I think since you did the YouTube, we seem to have like background noise just went off. I think we're good
Don't
now.
want that. Hold on.
Yeah, I think we're good now. Okay.
Zoom. I feel like it is absolutely true. We can't live with it and can't live without it. Fact of life, though. All right. Well, you're just gonna have to let me know if it does. It still sound like running water? No. Okay. So here's where we get into, that was written in 1972. Moving forward just 2 years to 1974, we get into, is it happening again? Well, I don't, hold on, let's see. How about now?
You still got it. Now it's off.
Now
now
it's probably because I'm not talking. This is gonna make for a real short program if we can't do this part.
It's okay, but it's not perfect. Right.
Sounds like static. Okay. Let's make sure YouTube is off. I wish that I was any kind of a techie. Let's see. Is it different now?
I think we're good now. Hopefully it'll stay good. Yeah.
Okay, so we moved from 1972 to 1974. And in that 2-year period, we see a big swell of that rock and roll style that Cantor Dreskin was talking about that really resonated within the NIFTY movement, the National Federation for Temple Youth, but was less comfortable in that classical reform space, even though it was in English. This one is appropriate because it's almost Hanukkah. Can you believe that Hanukkah is just 10 days from now? Is it bad again? I don't know what to do.
It's strange. That was like the worst sound we had just now. So I don't know, we were perfect until you showed the YouTube video, and that's since then.
Trying to have multimedia. No running water, but distortion on my guitar. Well, let's try the last thing I know how to do. And then
Now there's no noise now, so I think we're good right now. Hopefully it'll stay that way.
fix it. I'm out of options. Okay. But I'm just gonna keep going, and I apologize. No. But my Stan, I have no other options. I either have to keep going or we're gonna have to reschedule it.
Yeah, I'm not too sure that.
Not close to doing. You got what I wanted you to get, which was to hear from Cantor Dreskin and hear that evolution of Jewish music, the way that we understand it now, better with the running water.
Yeah.
Nothing I can do about that because it wasn't really running water.
Okay.
Maybe if you go off and back on.
I don't think it'll fix it. I think this is perhaps a connection issue of not my internet. That's strong. The first time ever. I think this is some kind of a mic issue. But I will say what you would have gotten from me in a jukebox setting is we started out with Debbie giving us that folk style that came from Peter, Paul, and Mary, that came from James Taylor and Carly Simon and all of those that we jukeboxers love to sing, that Debbie really brought that forward. And as the years progressed, where we would hear Not by Might in 1974, Lechie Lach, that came later in the 70s, and then we get into the 80s. And it's important to know that Debbie stood by herself in that space. Those of you who remember Jewish music in the 70s and 80s probably remember very well, but there were not other women who were in that folk Jewish space in that time. It wasn't until the late 90s that we started to see other traveling Jewish musicians who were female. And what a big contribution for Debbie, that she really did act as a standalone for about 25 years in that space. And it was her work that these other Jewish artists like Julie Silver, like Perry Smilo, like Beth Schaefer, were able to draw from her example and build. The most famous of Debbie's songs that we use all the time at Beth Or are probably her Misha Beirach, that we sing the prayer for healing every week. And we also, in the religious school, Debbie really paved the way as well for children's music. And that was something that we weren't seeing so much in the shul in the 60s and 70s. Yeah, we talked about that, Mike. We were gonna, this was gonna be in person. The Adult Ed series is on the third Thursday online. And I wish that I had a solution for the sound, but I don't. So allow me to talk you through it. And we're just gonna have to accept that technology.
It's pretty good right now, Lexie. I don't know. Do you want to give another try? It's
probably my guitar and mic issue, but I'm happy to just talk you through the rest of where we were going. And then I would be happy at some point to schedule a time for you to hear this body of work from Debbie Friedman and the women who came after her. So as I was saying before, that the most common ones that you'll hear at Beth Or and across the board are the Misha Beirach, but what Debbie did was make it okay for female Jewish composers to move into spaces where musicians were not writing. Like Cantor Dreskin was telling us about before, that nusach, that traditional Jewish music that was coming from the seminary was just that, traditional and often written for a man. We weren't getting things that women could sing to, and we weren't getting things to engage children. Debbie opened that door with things like the Aleph Bet song, that also is one that many people have no idea that she wrote, because it's just one that you learn when you're little, and it's a traditional melody. But if you've never heard it before, it's Aleph Bet Bet Gimel Dalet Hey. It's how all of our kids learn to sing the Aleph Bet, and it has been since the early 70s. And now we see Jewish artists after Jewish artists who are female and supported by the shoulders of Debbie Friedman. Our congregation has become good friends with several female Jewish artists over the years, and Cantor Dreskin is one of them, and Julie Silver is one of them. We often sing, and this is a little funny not to be able to sing them too. A lot of Julie Silver's work has found its way to Beth Orr, and it came by way of Dan Nichols, which is an important comment to make, that Debbie made it okay for these women's voices to be leading, and that male voices who were stepping into that space would not be intimidated by her, but if anything, would learn from her. And as Cantor Dreskin mentioned in the end of what she was saying to us, over the course of Debbie's work, she earned the respect of not just other women, but of composers across the board, and that her influence lives far beyond her, and likely always will, because of the change of the name from the School of Sacred Music to the Debbie Friedman School. So it didn't matter so much that she was not a cantor herself, but mattered so much the influence that she had and continues to have in this space. Other things that I think are super important to point out is how much Jewish music continues to change by female composers. Now you're seeing on our Bima, I love to bring in the work of female Jewish musicians. Like we've heard it together at Shabbat Alive. I often will select things by female Jewish composers that are in a country style. Country is one that my voice lends it to pretty easily, country and folk. So I do love to find female Jewish composers in that space, like the work of Nefesh Mountain, which is a Jewish bluegrass band. There are Jewish country bands now. There are Jewish jazz groups like the work of Chava Varel that Cantor Dreskin spoke about. But all of these things come from the legacy of Debbie Friedman. So without being able to sing to you, I've given you all of my spoken presentation, but I appreciate your willingness to sit with me anyway, and not to jump off when we couldn't go into our jukebox. But I will work with Hillary and with Stan about, I would be more than happy to present these things to you live, so that sound issues cannot be a stumbling block for us. But there you have it. My ability to do this work, and certainly Ellen's as well, is all on the shoulders of the Jewish female composers who came first. So thank you very much.
How about a couple of questions, Lexie?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Ellen mentioned that the conservative movement is now following the reform movement, and Jewish cantors are entering that community. What about Orthodox women who are singing? Do they have any opportunity at all?
In short, in a modern Orthodox setting, women sing in front of other women. In a more conservative Orthodox setting, no, there aren't opportunities for women to sing, because the Halakha, like Ellen was teaching us, suggests that women's voices are a distraction to men's prayer. So you don't hear it in Orthodox Judaism, but you certainly do now in the conservative movement as well. Some of that is because as Reform Judaism has grown and conservative Judaism, not to say that we fight or compete, but as Reform Judaism has grown, conservative Judaism is shrinking a little bit. So following those trends, and we all do it, we all borrow from each other to stay viable and to stay relevant. So you do see, like if you've been at Beth Meyer, Rabbi Jenny Solomon is a beautiful singer. And there are occasional Shabbat services where she sings. They don't use instrumentation in their services there, but you absolutely will hear women's voices.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any questions of Lexie. I'm curious about Debbie Friedman. Did she make a go of going into popular music? Did she give it a try or not?
You know, she didn't have to, because she had found such success and an ability to make a living. And that's a really important point. Debbie was the only woman in contemporary Jewish music who was able to make a living for over 25 years. The next examples that we have of that are Julie Silver and to a lesser extent, Perry Smilo and Beth Shafer. But until Julie Silver, you had a huge gap of years and years that Debbie was really a one woman show. If you wanted to have a female Jewish musician come to visit your congregation, she was the only act. So I don't know that it was even a consideration, because like we saw in the video, she felt it was very much her calling and her life's work to work in that space of Jewish music, and she knew that she was guiding this new era of contemporary Jewish music, and that likely, though she was an extremely humble person, that she was changing the face of what Jewish music would become. And that was probably clear to her pretty early, but you never would have heard her say that.
I think your most famous composition is May the Angels, the Hashkivenu, right? Does that gone far beyond Temple Beth Or? Has that been accepted?
Yeah, I've been pleased to hear about other congregations that are singing that song, and I would never call any of my compositions famous, but that if there's one that more than just Beth Or has sung, it's that piece. And I got to write that at Beth Or for Beth Or, so I feel pretty proud that we still sing it with some regularity. Yes, Rabbi Ari's cantorial soloist Lori sings it from time to time, so that's always a nice thing. But I feel extremely lucky that there are so many, unfortunate that there are so many female Jewish composers now, that our work starts to run together. One of us does not stand out among the rest because of the legacy of Debbie Friedman and certainly Julie Silver and others in that ilk, that we're so lucky to have had these shoulders to stand on, that none of our work really stands out above the others, because there are a ton of us now who are writing Jewish music because we can, and that we are blessed in that way. But no, I don't think any of my work will ever become famous like hers. But how long has Julie been singing? Julie is in her early 50s, and is similar to Debbie Friedman. She started in a girls' summer camp playing guitar and singing. I would hazard a guess that all of us who are currently in these roles started in that way, but started either in summer camps or in youth group settings. I started doing it as a music teacher in a Sunday school, but all in the same style as Ellen and Debbie. I'll tell you a funny story before we go. I had one opportunity to meet Debbie Friedman, and by the time I met her, she was seasoned in her career and a little bit less tolerant of young people like me. And so I was extremely nervous because I knew who she was, and I didn't know how that was going to go. And she heard me sing by myself. And like Ellen was saying, Debbie was very, very knowledgeable, and her Hebrew was impeccable, and her knowledge of liturgy, and she was extremely scholarly, which you may not have known just by seeing her. But I finished my piece and she said, if you don't know the Hebrew, how are they going to know the Hebrew? And I thought, okay, cool. And I have made it a point now for the rest of it. This is 20 years ago, but I've made it a point now to, anytime I sing something I am always extremely confident about, at least Hebrew pronunciation, even if I don't know the meaning of every word, but that will always be my memory of her, that if you don't know what you're doing, how will they know what they're doing? Which is a pretty good lesson for anything that you're ever going to teach. But anyway, if you have other questions, I'm happy to take them. And I truly mean it. I will reschedule a time to sing these songs for you in person, because it's a body of work that I think we can't lose, and that really deserves our respect. And whether we know it or not, we give it our respect by singing it all the time. It's a personal goal for me that we joke about these songs coming from Sinai and that we've lost who the authors are, but I take it personally that for the women who wrote them, they deserve to have their names known and they deserve to have their memories preserved. So yeah, we will schedule a time. Maybe we can do it right after Thanksgiving, so that we don't forget. Because
We'll see what we can do on that. Yeah.
Thank
So
you everybody for being here tonight. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your patience as technical difficulties are the name of the game in the COVID era. But thank you for hanging with me.
stuff happens. Thank you so much, Lexie. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording now.